Welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of Fantasy Football Weather Guys. I want to start off with an introduction of myself. I am joining the group. My name is Collin G. I will be offering services as the host and logistics for Fantasy Football Weather Guys. We have been busy the past couple weeks. We got our Twitter at FF Weather Guys. Again, that is at FF Weather Guys. Please follow us for up-to-date fantasy news and weather. We've also started a YouTube channel at FF Weather Guys, and please hit subscribe and like our videos. It is very important that we get followers and get the information to you, the fantasy football players. Again, we are the Fantasy Football Weather Guys. We are incorporating weather forecasts into fantasy stats, and I'll let Sean take over to give a brief intro again of what we're offering.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Colin. So Mike and I are both meteorologists, and one of the things that really kind of hit home with us recently is we both love the weather. We both love fantasy football. So we also realized that there is a huge kind of marriage between those two topics as well. So a lot of you have had these, wide receivers, quarterbacks, running backs that you thought were going to do really good in one week, and then they kind of flop. And, that may be due to because of what the weather was that day. Some positions perform better in certain weather conditions and not in others. So what we're doing, as Colin mentioned, is on a week-to-week basis, providing you what games you need to be aware of from a weather perspective and how that could potentially influence fantasy production for those games and for those players. And so we've developed a website, fantasyfootballweatherguys.weebly.com. And you'll see that we kind of rank every game for every week if it needs to be a concern for fantasy production.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Mike, would you like to add anything to what Sean said?
Yeah, sure. Hey, guys. This is meteorologist Mike Ventures. And first off, we're pumped here. We're excited to get this rolling. Something to keep in mind as we transition out of summer into the cold season, winter, sometimes weather won't always be impactful on player production around the league on a given week. So I think the value here, and we can all agree on that, is when the weather starts to get more extreme in nature, that's where we'll add this value. We're going to bring that information to you guys. So you don't have to understand, you don't have to really follow the weather in a given week. We'll provide that for you. We'll highlight those games, and we'll make sure that you're aware what sorts of risks there are from that weather variable. Because we know that setting your lineup on a given week is difficult enough in making those start-sit decisions. So that's what we're here to do.
So as this is entering the last week of preseason, we really do not have a forecast to offer since Season 1 of play starts September 5th, which we are all very excited about, even though it's a Thursday game, but we can get excited anyway. So we're going to go to some news that has happened over this weekend. And Mike, you want to talk about the big news with Andrew Luck?
Oh, man. So, yeah, as we've been playing fantasy football for over a decade now, we actually got to see Andrew Luck start out as a rookie, understand the amount of emotion and tout that this player was going to bring to the Indianapolis Colts. And it's just sad news to hear that he is stepping away and retiring from football.
We've seen some retirements in an early age, most recently with Megatron and even Gronk. So do you think this is a new thing with the league that players are getting burnt out and injured, and with the new regulations that they can't keep going?
Yeah, I think – Sorry, Mike. Just to one thing that really stood out to me is when in the press conference with Andrew Luck is he said he just didn't have the same passion and love for the game because of the in and out pain management that he had to go through on a week-to-week basis. So, it became too much for him, and I think eventually he was just kind of work-life balance at that point. There's certain parts of my life that I want to dedicate and be more focused on and not have to deal with the ins and outs of this pain that he's been dealing with the last 4 years, really since 2016.
Do we dare say it's the millennial attitude entering in the NFL? If it's not fun, I'm done playing?
I don't think so. I think, we're becoming better aware of mental health and health of our bodies. And I think it's we have to tip our hat to Andrew Luck here because he's aware enough in his life to understand that football may no longer be best for him emotionally and physically. So for him to step away from something he's driven his whole life to do, I think we have to respect that. And I think it's more of a component to understanding the unforeseen injuries that can happen in life and how that impacts your body from football.
So we've talked about Andrew Luck as a person, but what does this do for fantasy rosters? I think we have to take it in two steps, right? Bifurcate from the leagues that have already drafted and then those who haven't. What do
Yeah.
you think, Sean?
So, I mean, yeah, the big question is one of the higher drafted players was like Marlon Mack. And the question is, what do we do with him? Are they going to be stacking the box more? Is T.Y. Hilton still a big fantasy producer? Now you're talking about, Eric Ebron coming off a or 10 plus touchdown season. What does this do for these players? I mean, if you're drafting Marlon Mack in the second or third round, and you've already drafted, how do what do you do in that situation? I mean, I see you kind of hold on to him and see what happens. I still think he's going to be a heavily utilized player. I think the bigger question is, T.Y. Hilton. And who's going to be filling the shoes for Andrew Luck now? Is it going to be Jacoby Brissett? I think it was Chad Kelly, who's filling in last night and had a really good performance. So, I think it's still very much up in the air.
So I think there's a good speculation in the organization that Jacoby Brissett will be the guy, right? And he still is fairly young, but I do think it offers significant downside to the receivers in the game, right? T.Y. Hilton, when the year he played with Jacoby Brissett when Andrew Luck was hurt, I think he had his worst outing as a player performance since his rookie season. So, I think when he had Andrew Luck there, he had an upside, maybe like a top 10 upside there on any given week. But I think as now Jacoby Brissett steps in, I think that value where he should be drafted is probably somewhere in the wide receiver 30 to 25 number, rather than as you get into the teens.
So would you draft him if you saw T.Y. Hilton in the fourth round, back of the third, maybe early fourth? Would you be taking T.Y. Hilton?
I think I'm a pass. I think I'm gonna go with some of those younger wideouts that have that upside still. It's hard. It's a hard thing because there was such expectations for the Colts this year. I know some people had them winning the Super Bowl. I just don't think that's a realistic option now.
Yeah, not with him without QB. I mean, I think even their playoff hopes have, possibly. I mean, they have gone down at least, but I don't see them even as a playoff contender at this point. They've improved their offensive line. I think that's good news for Marlon Mack and possibly the passing game, but I just don't think they have the leadership now to get them there.
So moving on to more bad news of the weekend. Lamar Miller out with an ACL, possible tear. What does that mean for the Texans? Where do they go? And, who are they going to take as a backup if they start Duke Johnson?
Yeah, so I think it's been confirmed it's a tear, and he's out for the season. And that's a huge blow for the Houston Texans organization now. Luckily, they traded for Duke Johnson, right? So they have a backup there who has proven himself. He was more of a third down back, so to carry the load, I think he's going to get every opportunity today. But it wouldn't surprise me if we see the Houston Texans make some kind of move here to get another running back to get some depth.
Yeah, I mean, right now at backup, they have Buddy Howell and Josh Ferguson. I've never even heard of these guys before. Obviously, they've gotten some preseason play, but Duke Johnson's the main guy. But I think they need somebody to come in there and take the workload. That's what they're used to with Lamar Miller. And Lamar Miller, I mean, we don't like to draft him very high, but he's a super consistent player, kind of year in and year out. I mean, he doesn't have the big explosive playability, but he is a consistent player on a lot of people's rosters as an RB2-3 option. So I think they got to really look at bringing somebody in here. There was some talk about, I know the Texans, and their fans really want to talk about Melvin Gordon and the possibilities there. But that's the kind of player, maybe not to that caliber, but they need to think about bringing in because Duke Johnson's not, a workhorse 3-down back.
I think all of Texas right now is rooting for Melvin Gordon to get traded over to the Texans because you put Gordon on that roster with Hopkins and Watson. I mean, it's just going to add a huge element to their game. So I think it would be really interesting if Gordon gets traded over. That would be huge.
So are we drafting – sorry, real quick, just from a fantasy standpoint, are we drafting Duke Johnson earlier now? His ADP was a little bit lower, double-digit rounds. Are we moving him up? Are we more bullish on Duke Johnson now?
Go ahead, Mike.
I think you have to be, right? I think that we see that fantasy football is a component of skill, but also a component of opportunity. And he has an opportunity now to move forward and become the number one.
Okay. So the last thing, keep it on running backs and Texas. Zeke, what do you think is going to go on? going to be paid as tied as the second highest, or in the top two, I think they said, of running backs. Do you think his ego will let him sign that deal? Personally, I'm hoping, as one who has him as a keeper, that he signs the deal. But we never know nowadays. After Bell with his holdout, it really shows a new age of who holds the power with the contracts with these number one running backs.
Yeah, and I think I think a lot of people have had their fantasy drafts already. So, right now it's about risk management, quite frankly. I'm not drafting Zeke in the top 4 right now if I were to draft right now because there's just too much risk associated with that. I think Zeke's alluded to that he is still not completely happy with that contract that they proposed. I know there's been some activity in social media where he's liked certain posts that feel like he should be still granted more money given the skill level of player that he is. So, the big question is this going to go into the regular season and how many games, kind of like the Melvin Gordon situation? And I think it has the potential to do that. I think, he wants to make a stand here. So I'm hoping they could come to an agreement by week 1, but I'm skeptical.
I understand that skepticism, Sean, and it's a real type of risk, on draft day that you have to deal with. For me, I'm rolling the dice. I'm going with Zeke. He has been their offense, for the last 3 years, and he is putting up running back 1 numbers every year. He's one of the most consistent players to make those types of productions, and I just don't see Dallas walking away from Zeke. I think they're going to try really hard to make that contract work, and also with the news with Amari Cooper now and his injury with his feet, I think there's less of a there's more risk for Dallas to invest in Amari Cooper rather than have Zeke as their true workhorse and to facilitate that offense through. So on draft day, if Zeke's their number 4, I'm taking him.
Not to spoil the pot of this conversation, but I tend to have a view that I'm getting a little upset of these renegotiation contracts in football. I don't think it's fair that the player holds the power that when they have good seasons, they get to renegotiate. What happens if they have a bad season? Do the team then get to renegotiate and pay them less?
Yeah, it's something that we're seeing happen more and more, especially in recent years. And I think that there's a component to a better education about how football can deteriorate your body, right? And how the wear and tear on a body and what the long-term impacts are. And, it is unfair to the owners and the organizations to have to deal with this. But I'm all in support of the players. I think they have the right to make these demands.
Yeah, I think the thing with Zeke that I'm a little bit upset about is, he's had pretty consistent off the field issues. So there's a little bit of a risk there. And, they are proposing to make him the second highest RB in the league. So I don't know if he's being a little bit too greedy, on this point. Unfortunately, this is something that we're seeing more of, to Mike's point. RB's shelf life are not very long. It's hard for them to hold up, especially the workhorse load like a Zeke provides. They're not in the league for, 10, 15 years. So they're trying to cash in as much as they can, which, I respect and I understand. But, it's a real balancing act as to, making sure you're getting paid and getting compensated, but also making sure you're not a detriment to the rest of your team. Because if you're not there and you're that caliber player, it's going to have a large impact.
So for next week, we like to talk about the news and the players. We also will incorporate weather. That's very important from our platform since we are the fantasy football weather guys. Mike, would you want to just talk about anything informational for our fans to understand what the weather conversation would look like in fantasy?
Yeah, sure. So we are, when weather is going to play a role here or at least when we expect that to, we're going to focus on those games where there's extremes in weather, right? If there's going to be some kind of heavy rain event during the game or potentially snow as you get into the winter season, or even like strong winds or really cold temperatures. These are all things that has, some statistics now you can find that impact these player productions. I think there's statistics out there that suggest during these extreme weather events, there's like 4% reductions in quarterback production as well as wide receiver production. There actually can be some positive spins from weather as well. I think as the season progresses and matures, though, will really get more involved with the weather component, however, compared to early on in the season.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, currently, we're trying to build a model right now that's going to help us provide as much value as we can for your fantasy league. So, if you're going in and we're going to be having 30-mile-an-hour winds and heavy rain, and you're like, what do I do with my running back? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? We're going to have numbers there, and we're going to have a blog post within our website for certain players that we feel are at the greatest risk. So, if you're wondering, like, hey, what kind of positions are most influenced by this weather, don't worry. We're going to cover that within that blog post every single week, depending on, what games we're most concerned about.
Great. And again, our weather fantasy football site is, again, www.fantasyfootballweatherguys.weebly.com. And again, you can follow us on Twitter at FFWeatherGuys. And our YouTube channel, I misspoke, is Fantasy Football Weather Guys, not FF Weather Guys. So please follow us. Please hit subscribe. Please like the videos. We'll try to push out content weekly for you and update as the weather changes.
Yeah, very good. Also, I just want to add one more thing. We have a mailbag on our website. We want to constantly improve and, make this more entertaining and interesting for you, for your fantasy league, for your fantasy team. So if you have any feedback for us, please write us an email, give us feedback. Again, we're here for you.